Now, Bruce Forsyth explores the life and work of the entertainer Sammy Davis Jr. with references to racial discrimination and strong racist language on Perspectives.
Nationwide, sponsors of UTV documentaries.
Lucy, where are your brothers?
This is the story of a star, the kind of performer you don't see anymore. The first time I saw him on stage, I made a career change. I consider myself lucky to have worked with him and call him my friend. Sammy Davis Jr. was the greatest entertainer that ever lived. But since his death, I think a lot of you may have forgotten just how great he really was.
I am free, I lay my life.
First of all, he could sing. He could do tricks.
Shucks, I wouldn't put it on unless I was good at it.
He could tell jokes.
Have you never seen a colored Jewish cowboy?
He played instruments.
Champ.
And he could act.
Champ. Champion.
And above all, could he dance. He could do all that, but at the highest possible level.
Don't go to anybody else but me.
What I didn't know was, personally, how tough it was for him to fight against the prejudice he encountered.
My name is Sammy Davis. My name is Sammy Davis. My name is...
Learning about that has made me admire his achievements all the more. Sammy and I worked together on a TV special in this very studio in 1980. It is the best studio in London. It's just got that lovely feeling of about 500 people there, ready to be entertained. And this is where it all happened with Sammy in 1980. We hadn't rehearsed, as I hoped, but then we started to work. And I could tell he knew every word, every syllable. It was the best show I've ever been associated with. In all my years in the business, this was the one.
You and I are salt and pepper.
We were the same sort of age and had the same sort of theatrical background.
Much mistaken, we're coffee and cream.
For me, it was variety, and for him, what they call vaudeville. But we both aspired to become all-round entertainers.
Where do we go from here now? Well, in your case, your dressing room. What do you mean?
What a guy. Hey, that's beautiful. What a fool am I to think my breaking heart could kiss the moon.
Just listen to that voice.
No, it's best that I stick to my tune.
So for this show, we did a bit of everything. But by the 80s, Sammy didn't do what I think he was best at. The astonishing skill he had because he was born in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, very good.
New York's famous crossroad and one of the busiest, a smart shopping center where thousands pass daily.
Sammy was born in New York in 1925. Not in glamorous Manhattan, but in Harlem.
Harlem, land of swing and jive, where the world learns how to sing and dance.
This isn't Sammy, but it could have been. Kids like him grew up dancing on the street. Their parents and grandparents had invented jazz, and with it, their own kind of tap dancing. Sammy was more than a street dancer. His family were in entertainment. He appeared in his first film at the age of 5.
I'll do something.
All right, honey, come on, step down here and show.
You can see that right from the start. He had great rhythm and he knew how to use it. And what stage presence. Even at 5, you cannot take your eyes off him. Sammy was one of the greatest, if not the greatest, black tap dancer. The reason I emphasise black, because there's such a difference between English tap dancing and black tap dancing. English tap dancing is on the toes, and you lift your shoulders up, and it's all up here, almost like the Irish dance. As a child, when I saw black tap dancers, that was the difference. Bent knees, shoulders hunched. Sammy had natural ability, but he developed it on the road with his father. Sam Davis Sr. was a vaudeville dancer, and Sammy's mother, Elvira, a Cuban chorus girl. The couple separated when Sammy was 2. From 3, he was on the road with his dad, who worked for an impresario, Will Mastin. Sammy called him Uncle. Sammy never had a day of formal education. His childhood was spent standing in the wings of theatres, watching and learning, just as I did.
Now when you lay your 6 feet deep, never nothing. I be glad when you're dead.
You can see his promise as a performer. Will Mastin certainly did.
Yeah!
Before Sammy was in his teens, the Will Mastin Trio was born.
There was a boy.
Life on the road was tough. By now, America was in depression, and the trio scraped a living travelling from town to town by railroad, picking up bookings wherever they could. This is the kind of place that Sammy would have spent most of his time travelling in between engagements. The railway station, it was your only contact with the outside world. Getting to the next theatre or the next nightclub. I did the same thing during the war, and I could imagine Sammy with his uncle and his father, they probably had a train call every week. And the first one who got in the carriage got the luggage rack, because the luggage rack is where I spent hours sleeping. And I bet Sammy must have done the same thing.
They say he wandered very far.
Sammy was called up in 1944, but as soon as he was demobbed, the Will Mastin Trio carried on where they left off. Almost immediately came their first booking in the town that was to feature a lot in Sammy's future career, Las Vegas. Although they were the star performers at the El Rancho Hotel and Casino, as black artists they weren't permitted to stay in the hotel. They had very dismal lodgings in what was known as the Negro side of town. In the casino, the trio played to all white audiences, but they were stunned by the young performer.
Because this little piggy was the boogie piggy, and he did the boogie all the way home.
Sammy's low centre of gravity made him an amazing tap dancer. Bookers and theatre owners all said the same. The trio are good, but the kid in the middle is sensational. This rare film from 1947 shows the immense physical strength of young Sammy, and how his dad and Uncle Will were already supporting plays. As the 50s began, the place to be was Hollywood, centre of the new television industry. The new variety shows booked acts that already had an established following.
You know Sammy Davis, the bellboy from the hotel across the street, don't you?
Some stage performers find the move to television difficult, but you can see how easily Sammy adapted. You have to be completely relaxed to achieve this speed of dance. It was quite evident in whatever he did. The Will Maston Trio have been playing to packed houses, but only a few hundred people at a time. Now they could reach millions with just one appearance on television. Sammy took to the new medium, and audiences took to him, especially young black viewers. My good friend, the entertainer Madeline Bell, watched him when she was a teenager.
Everybody's eyes were on him,
Yeah.
and their ears were on him.
Hey there, you on that high-flying cloud.
There weren't that many black people on television, so when he was on television, every black person watched it.
Then from a jail, there came a wail from a down.
I mean, we were all glued to the television, so this talent, and you were just so proud. And I mean, Sammy Davis Jr. was the best. He taught everybody else how to do it.
It was an appearance on a live variety show that pushed Sammy further into the limelight, but not in the way he was expecting. This is the Avalon nightclub, previously known as the El Capitan Theatre. Now, on the 17th of February 1952, the program was the Colgate Comedy Hour. Host Eddie Cantor was a huge star who could make or break an act.
This is the greatest act I have ever seen. Here is the Will Maston Trio and Sammy Davis Jr., okay?
After Sammy's show-stopping performance, Cantor came on, took out his handkerchief, and caused a national outrage. In 1950s America, for a white man to mop a black man's brow was unheard of. To do so on network television gave the gesture a political significance. The sponsors threatened to pull out, and the network threatened to fire Cantor. But Cantor said, oh no, this is my show, and I'm going to do it my way. Sammy received hundreds of abusive letters, including one quoted in his autobiography. Keep your filthy paws off Eddie Cantor. He may be a Jew, but at least he's white, and don't come from Africa where you should go back to, I hope. What's dirt like you doing on our good American earth, anyway?
This is the greatest stage of all.
Eddie Cantor held his nerve. The network and sponsors backed down, and the trio were welcomed back to the show many times.
It's a pleasure to be back.
Cantor became a hero to Sammy, and later introduced him to the Jewish faith, which he embraced for the rest of his life. Cantor gave Sammy a mezuzah, a Jewish token, which he wore around his neck for luck, and rarely took off. But on the night of the 18th of November, 1954, he left it in his dressing room at the New Frontier Casino. Due at a recording session in Hollywood next morning, he got into his car, a new Cadillac given to him by his father, and with his valet, Charlie Head, began the long drive back to Los Angeles through the desert night, along the most famous highway in America. Just after dawn, Sammy was about 90 minutes from his destination, and Charlie was napping on the back seat. The radio was playing Sammy's first hit record.
Hey there, you with the stars in your eyes. Love never...
I've done it myself. You've done a couple of shows, you're tired, you've got a long journey to make. So part of your job is traveling all over the country and driving yourself. If you're not the big star, you haven't got a chauffeur. This can be very tiring, and things can happen for the worse. And they did for poor little Sammy. Well, this is where this terrible tragedy happened. Sammy's driving along the famous Route 66. He's driving along there. He didn't know there were two old ladies driving in front, about 200 yards in front of him, up there. They realised they'd taken a wrong turning, because the turning they should have been was the one behind us here, and they started to do a U-turn, and of course Sammy went smack into them. Sammy's Cadillac bounced off the old lady's car and crashed into a concrete pillar. He lay dazed in the wreckage, blood pouring down his face. Sammy's head had jerked forward and hit the steering wheel with such force that the central plastic dome pierced his eye. When he came out of surgery, as well as his left eye, he'd lost his sense of balance. For a dancer, a catastrophe. Among the stars at his bedside was his best friend, Frank Sinatra.
You won't regret
It takes a lot to keep an entertainer off the stage. All performers know the saying, Dr. Showbiz will get you through, and applause will be your medicine. But I don't think I've ever heard a story of grit and determination like Sammy's fight back from the accident. Back in Los Angeles, he went on his own each day to a rehearsal room, armed only with a record player, and by sheer force of will, Sammy slowly taught himself to balance again, to move again, and finally to dance again. Frank Sinatra said Sammy's comeback needed to make a big impact, and it should be in Hollywood. For Sammy, that meant returning to a place he loved, one that always attracted an A-list crowd. Well, this is the famous Comedy Store, but in the 1950s, it was known as Ciro's nightclub. Sammy and the trio had been a big hit at Ciro's before. Now, just 2 months after his accident in the desert, Sammy was back. Even now, just standing here, although the place is empty, you can still feel an atmosphere. Sammy made his comeback, and what a comeback. 59 years ago, George Slaughter booked acts for the club. He would become a television producer and a friend to Sammy. That night, he sat by the stage watching the show. I wish I'd have been there. His comeback, and that was a very special night, wasn't it?
Well, you couldn't get near the building. You couldn't drive on the street. Everybody was here for Sam. And sitting right here, next to the stage, with this monumentally important event, Sinatra and Dean Martin and Jeff Chandler were playing cards. No. Sammy came out. The ovation was huge, and they're sitting there playing cards, right? And, of course, Marilyn Monroe was sitting over here, and Sophia Loren was sitting over there. I mean, you couldn't look around the room without seeing some movie stars. You know? And that night remains one of the most exciting nights in show business. Sammy, by then, had the eye patch on. Yeah. And he opened with a 30-foot knee slide from the dressing room out to here, and then proceeded to do the most exciting nightclub appearance you've ever seen. He sang, he danced, he played instruments, he did impressions, he did, everything you can imagine. The place just went nuts. And by the next morning, he was the single biggest star in all of show business.
Nationwide, sponsors of UTV documentaries.
The first ever Infiniti Q30, born to challenge.
My heart heart's beating way too fast for its own good. But I don't care. I know with utter certainty my fortunes are going to change forever.
Whoever wears the bracelet is endowed with immense luck.
The good luck it brings me, what does that cost others?
That's the thing about luck, Harry. It always balances out in the end.
Keep on gaming and hooking up with your mates. Keep on making the odd brew and burning the midnight oil. Keep on getting a little bit more out of life. Switch to a 123 current account and get 3% interest on balances between £3,000 and £20,000 and up to 3% cash back on household bills. Simple, personal, fair. It's what a bank should be.
So, first impressions?
The house is telling me that we are near amazing transport links. The nearest top-rated school is only 0.3 miles away. The floorboards are saying that the people around here read the Telegraph.
Zoopla.
Amy knows what she's doing. She started her property search on Zoopla.
We should probably look upstairs.
Boston priests abused 80 kids over the last 30 years.
People need to know.
I don't want you recording this in any shape or form. Nothing.
The church will silence anyone who speaks up.
They control everything. This is big. It's the whole world.
They'll come after you and your team.
They knew, and they let it happen.
Spotlight.
Ready for the holidays?
Wow, you lost weight. You look great.
It's XLS Medical. Could help you lose up to 3 times more weight versus dieting alone.
I'll never fit into my holiday wardrobe.
Take new XLS Medical Max Strength to reduce calorie intake from carbohydrates, sugar and fat. So you can lose weight faster.
New XLS Medical Max Strength, our most effective weight loss aid yet. Now, save 25% at Boots.
Every 6 seconds, someone contacts Samaritans for help.
Samaritans is available around the clock.
Every single day of the year.
We provide emotional support.
By phone, email, text or face-to-face.
We don't ask names.
And we never judge.
If you're struggling to cope, please call Samaritans on 116 123.
The home for all the things you love. That's the joy of storage. IKEA, the wonderful everyday.
It's springtime on our farms.
It's only the first time I've ever done it. We always sell a few cattle every year, but we never sold 250 cattle one day before.
We've real high hopes for this lamb in the summertime.
Let me assure you that the sheep have more power in their brain than the dog and the man put together.
Rare Breed, Monday at 8 on UTV.
Nationwide, sponsors of UTV documentaries.
Yeah, Gov, it's just a massive nationwide logo. Over.
After his triumphant comeback at Ciro's nightclub in Hollywood, Sammy Davis Jr. was one of the biggest names in show business, loved by the public and by his fellow stars. In 1957, Sammy began secretly dating movie actress Kim Novak. They kept it quiet. Interracial relationships were taboo. One person who did find out was the head of Columbia Pictures, Harry Cohn. Kim Novak was his hottest new star. Bert Boyar was a Broadway journalist and friend who would one day co-write Sammy's autobiography.
Harry Cohn was connected to the mob, and he took out a contract on Sammy, and the contract was to kill him or to maim him to eliminate his relationship to Kim Novak.
Harry Cohn called and said Sammy wanted him to come over to the studio. So Sammy said, oh, that's great, all right, great.
Oh,
so
yeah.
He said, Sam, I understand you have a relationship with Miss Novak. Oh, Sammy says, yeah, we're good friends. He said, no, Sam, you're more than good friends. She is our biggest star. She means a great deal to this studio. and it will not do her any good to have a relationship with you. Therefore, you will never see Kim Novak again. If you do, you'll lose the other eye. Sammy, what did I do? He said, you're getting married on Saturday. You've always wanted to marry a white woman. Well, her name is Lorraine White.
Strangely enough, Lorraine White was a black Vegas singer. Sammy did indeed marry her the following weekend at the Sands Hotel.
I think he paid her $10,000 and all the shoes she could buy, and to be Mr. Sammy Davis Jr. And it was well publicized, and all the heat then was off of Kim Novak. She was the love of his life. He really was completely, desperately in love with her, and I think she with him.
Their marriage lasted 6 months.
Let's face the music and dance.
Sammy was now a bona fide superstar. As the 1960s dawned, he was back in Las Vegas to shoot Ocean's 11, alongside Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Joey Bishop and Peter Lawford. What happened during the 5-week shoot has become show business legend. They shot the movie during the day and each night performed an improvised nightclub show in the Copa Room at the Sands Hotel. Nothing was off limits. It was known as the Summit at the Sands, and it was the hottest ticket in America. The casino turned away 18,000 reservation requests in the first week alone. At the time, the group were known as the Clan. Since then, more memorably, the Rat Pack. The shows themselves were a cocktail of elegant showbiz glamour, machismo and cool, and everyone wanted to be a part of it. Even presidential hopeful John F. Kennedy came along.
Delighted to have in our audience the brightest man in the political world in this country or any other country today, Senator John Kennedy from the great state of Massachusetts.
Frank Sinatra had the great pleasure of introducing John F. Kennedy. And then later, we were upstairs in Frank's suite, and Peter Lawford was in a side room, and he cracked the door open, and he went like this. And he said, do you want to see what $1 million looks like? So Sammy and I went into the room. There was a satchel filled with $100 bills, which had been given to the Kennedy campaign by the casino owners, which were, in fact, the mob, the mafia.
Not yet, sir. All right. You're just too marvelous.
Whenever comedians work together, one of them is the fall guy. In the Rat Pack, that was Sammy, and many of the jokes were based on his colour.
Hey, Zelda, look, I'll go out and I'll drink with you. I'll go pick cotton with you. I'll eat oranges with you. I'll go to shul with you, but don't touch me. Have you forgotten the South?
I'm trying to, baby.
Yeah.
Go, you mother.
That black cello case in the waiter's jacket centre stage was there for laughs. But this was edgy stuff. Civil rights was the biggest issue in America, and the pack were mocking racism. Further south, the Ku Klux Klan was still a force, and skits like this dared the audience not to laugh.
All right, folks, put on your sheets and we'll start the meeting.
Oh, come on. Go bore a few holes in that and be somebody.
Sinatra had always championed the rights of black musicians. He insisted that Sammy stayed at the Sands with the rest of them and lobbied other casino owners to let black customers in. I think for Sammy, this camaraderie must have made him feel accepted. But offstage, little had changed. Sammy was staying at and playing the Sands when some gamblers from the South saw him in the hotel pool and made the management drain it. The race issue was about to get hotter because Sammy spotted a young Swedish actress named Maj-Britt. He fell for her and she for him. They became inseparable. Sammy brought her on his first trip to Britain in May 1960, which is when I first met him.
That's why the lady is a tramp. Why?
Well, I feel very emotional coming back here to the Victoria Palace because this is where I first meet the great man. We'd looked forward to him coming here for a couple of years, and he finally arrived. May 1960, the command performance in front of the Queen. Yes, this is where it all happened. Now, as a host of a show, you have the power, shall we say, to cut applause off or keep it going. I came back after Sammy's act. I knew he would be a sensation. And the applause and the cheers for more were absolutely wonderful. He went off, he came back, which under the rules was the thing to do, took a bow, and I looked at the audience again and put my hand out to him. And I said, come on back. And he didn't know what to do because the rules are you come back for one bow. Now, as a host, you can just walk forward and say, wasn't that wonderful? And you can cut it dead. But I just couldn't do it. I just had to bring him back again. And it was absolutely marvellous.
Well, there's a real performer, if you like.
When an irresistible force such as you...
One great show wasn't enough for Sammy. As soon as the curtain came down, we were off to Piccadilly, where he was booked for a month of performances. Ah, yes, the Pigalle. Everybody in show business was looking forward to this night. The first time Sammy performed in a nightclub in England. He did 47 performances in 25 days. The stamina of the man was incredible, and the show was just electric. It was while they were here in London that Sammy and Mai announced their engagement, and that caused a storm in America. There was even a reaction here. One night he arrived at the club, and outside was Mosley's black shirt, a racist demonstration. He's going to work and confronted with that. Sammy was shaken, but there was worse to come back home. In October, he was appearing at the Huntington Hartford Theatre in Hollywood. His longtime friend Steve Blauner, who later became a movie producer, recalls exactly what happened.
He was doing a one-man show, and it was the time that he was about to marry Mai Britt, a white Swedish goddess. So I went backstage before the show to wish him luck, and I come out, and there were 4 guys with the brown shirts, the swastikas, placards with these terrible things on them. And I went berserk. One guy I threw over a car, grabbed the placard, broke it over my leg. The second guy, I've got him on the ground in the gutter, and I'm hitting his head into the gutter. And I wasn't going to stop. The police knocked me off, and now they were going to arrest me for inciting a riot.
News of Sammy's engagement to a white woman was a major story in America. When he appeared at the Democratic National Convention to pledge his support for John Kennedy, he could hear booing from some Southern delegates.
Mr. Sammy Davis, Jr.
Later, he recalled that as the convention sang the Star-Spangled Banner, the tears stung his eyes. Sammy was a high-profile Kennedy supporter, and to avoid embarrassing the candidate, he postponed his wedding. He married Mai less than a week after Election Day. His best man, Frank Sinatra. The stars who supported Kennedy's election were all invited to the inauguration in Washington in January 1961. Sinatra himself produced the gala event, and Sammy looked forward to being there with his new wife.
Sammy went and worked his ass off, did dates all over for them. Now came the inauguration ball and the party that Frank was running. And Joe Kennedy, the father, he said, no Sammy.
He got a call from Evelyn Lincoln, who was Kennedy's secretary.
Yes.
And she said, Mr. Davis, the president would appreciate it if you don't show up.
Oh, my God.
And the other advisors were all saying, you can't have Sammy Davis Jr. at the inaugural because he'll have to bring my Brit, who was white, and that was very controversial. He was so excited about going there that he, who had probably 15 or 20 dinner suits, had a special one made just for the White House. Amai bought a Balenciaga gown, and they were just all excited. And then he had to tell his wife, we can't come. Imagine having to tell your wife, I'm not good enough.
Sammy put a brave face on it, but the pain of that moment must have cut deep. Despite being a huge star, the really powerful still sidelined him. His presence at the heart of the American establishment would be an embarrassment. Kennedy's Camelot was not colorblind. Sammy returned to the issue in 1964 when he opened on Broadway in Golden Boy. This was a musical, the story of a young black boxer and his white girlfriend. Sammy jumped at the role that showed how love was more important than race.
I'll be the champ. So?
It was also a chance to demonstrate his acting.
Champ. Champion.
The opening scene was a fight in a boxing ring, and it was the most exciting first act I've ever seen.
The show ran for 568 performances. The press noted that he was the first star to be on Broadway, shooting a movie and making his own TV series at the same time. Everyone wanted him, and he couldn't say no. Mai moved with their children to New York to be with him, but the marriage was under pressure.
There was a given Sunday when Mai said, please take the children, just play with them, be out with them. And he said, okay, I will. And then the entertainment editor of Life magazine asked Sammy to do an interview with him on that Sunday. And so he agreed to it. And that meant he couldn't spend the afternoon with the kids. And that was when Mai just said, that's it. And I can't handle it anymore.
Mai and the children moved back to Los Angeles. She hated the way that Sammy's living the showbiz dream didn't include being a father. Sammy had grown up living with one parent. Now his own children would have to do the same. In 1965, Bert Boyar had co-written Sammy's life story. The title would be adapted 40 years later as the campaign slogan of America's first black president. That said it all for Sammy in the mid-60s. He could, and he did.
I said, yes, I can. You're gonna hear from...
Sammy was on every medium. On stage, he was on fire.
Why, that makes my day.
In 1967, he was back in London for one of the first colour TV recordings, a one-man show at the #1 cabaret venue, the talk of the town.
It sounds kind of hammy, but take it from Sammy.
And you never seen a colored Jewish cowboy?
Celebrities packed into the room to see Sammy at the top of his game. Looking his sharpest, the epitome of 60s cool.
Thank you very much. Look out!
But as a performer, you have to keep changing to stay current. When the 70s arrived, Sammy realized the rest of the music industry had moved on and left him behind. Desperate to find his place among the new stars now filling the charts, Sammy signed to the label that now defined black music in America. Oh, that was the Motown a disaster.
For once in my life.
Commercially, the Motown album was a flop. It was called Something for Everyone, but no one wanted it.
I can go where life leads me.
Berry Gordy, he said, I can sell Sammy Davis Jr. And the Motown people went out and they couldn't sell them. His people could not sell Sammy Davis Jr.
Well, I'm amazed to hear that.
He made 2 albums for Berry Gordy. They never released the second one, and it just fizzled.
Sammy was 45 years old, and he'd been on stage for 42 of them. All he knew was performing, but now, in middle age, it looked as though Sammy's spotlight was beginning to dim.
Nationwide, sponsors of UTV documentaries.
To the occupier. Oh, no, get back!
Neighbour hears a car door slam.
Each day is all the same. You don't pray for health, but you pray for change. You don't pray for sun, but you pray for rain. And you ask God, what is your name?
Dumps the body. Slings the bag. So what's the plan that's gone pear-shaped?
If you don't start talking soon, pet, I'm going to take your lovely fairground apart, and then your house, and then your car, until I find something.
This is her kicking off her shoes and running for her life.
The brand new series of Vera starts 31st of January on UTV.
Drip it. Drizzle it. Dash it. Dip it. Roast it. Mash it. Naturally brewed for over 300 years. Cook it up with Kikkoman soy sauce. And try our teriyaki sauce.
How does football work? You need a team. Doing all kinds of jobs. And the best place to find the job that's right for you is on the world's #1 job site. Indeed, how the world works.
We've got 2 stories here. A story about degenerate clergy and a story about lawyers turning child abuse into a cottage industry. Which story do you want us to write?
The church will silence anyone who speaks out.
We're going to tell this story. We're going to tell it right.
Spotlight.
Guinness has always been about beer and people. Every day we roast our own barley to a black state of perfection. And many of us have entered these gates in the footsteps of our parents and our grandparents. We're only 255 years into a 9,000-year lease. We've a lot more beer to make.
You are making too much noise.
She started it. No, who started it?
No, you started it.
No, you started it.
Hey, this is not a kindergarten for the people of the Middle Ages.
Middle Age? I think he means middle-aged. How dare you? I'm nowhere near middle-aged.
Benidorm continues tomorrow at 9 on UTV.
There's not going to be 1 grain of sugar for the 2 weeks on the farm.
Real food, nothing else.
There's some broken people.
This is feeding my soul.
Can 6 celebrities go?
Sugar-free!
I've actually achieved something.
The brand new series, Sugar Free Farm, Tuesday at 8 on UTV. It's springtime on our farms.
It's only the first time I've ever done it. We always sell a few cattle every year, but we never sold 250 cattle one day before.
We have real high hopes for this lamb in the summertime.
Let me assure you that the sheep have more power in their brain than the dog and the man put together.
Rare Breed, Monday at 8 on UTV.
Nationwide, sponsors of UTV documentaries.
Oh, were you born in a barn?
Chink, chink, ka-chink, chink, ka-chink.
Sammy's Motown project was supposed to put him back at the top of the music business, but it flopped. Then came the chance to record a novelty song from a children's film.
Who can take a sunrise, sprinkle it with dew?
The Candyman was from the film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. As a single, it was a huge hit. Sammy's only #1 in America. The song was written by Anthony Newley and Leslie Brickus. Leslie had known Sammy for years and wrote 60 songs for him.
We had just written the Willy Wonka thing, and a record producer persuaded Sammy, whom they just signed, to do it. And Sammy did it. The Candyman, yea, the Candyman can. It was doing okay, and he would call us and say, it's number 17, it's number 15, it's number 12, and it suddenly did the last lap and sold millions of records. I've never quite understood why myself.
Well, we heard he disliked the song so much, he did one take and said, no, I'm not singing that song anymore. That's done it.
Well, maybe that's the way to do it.
The Candyman followed Sammy around, but it wasn't the song that became his most famous.
I knew a man, Bojangles, and he danced for you.
Mr. Bojangles was the story of an old vaudeville hoofer, down on his luck, refusing to accept that vaudeville and his career was over.
He would do the old soft shoe.
He was in London, and he was going to do the Tom Jones special.
Yes.
And Tom said, I've got a great song for you. It's Mr. Bojangles.
That was Mr. Bojangles.
Sammy said, I can't do that song. He hated the song, and he finally got talked into doing it, and finally it got to the point where it was so popular, he couldn't get off without doing it. He'd go off, and they'd say, Bojangles, Mr. Bojangles.
He spoke with tears of 15 years, how his dog and he.
The way Sammy performs this song, acting out every emotion, he becomes Mr. Bojangles. It's a masterclass for performers everywhere in how to make an audience feel every single word.
He said I dance, now at every chance in honky-tonks.
As a performance, Sammy singing Mr. Bojangles was like Olivier playing Hamlet.
Talked of life. Lord, that man talked of life. Laughed.
The completeness of it, the acting, the style of it, the posture, the sincerity and truth of his performance was absolutely wonderful.
Mr. Bojangles, Mr. Bojangles.
As a performance piece, I think the best thing I've ever seen anybody do. And to me, that was his masterpiece.
You aren't going to buy Sammy Davis Jr. by inviting him to the White House. You're going to buy him by doing something for America.
I think, like a lot of performers who start very young, Sammy was a kid inside. He loved to be loved. In 1972, President Nixon showed him the respect he never got from JFK. Sammy lapped it up.
We both came from rather poor families. We both have done rather well.
Sammy was at a convention in Miami, and Richard Nixon arrived, and he started talking about Sammy. And Sammy was so taken, so emotionally grateful to Nixon that he just lunged forward and hugged him. And there was a photograph of that went around the world. It was the most widely publicized photograph of Sammy ever. It was just a gesture of thank you, but it was taken up so badly by the Americans. The whole Hollywood community just didn't want to have anything to do with him because of Nixon.
Nixon had shown an interest in Sammy back in the 50s, long before JFK. During his first presidency, he'd invited him to the White House to sleep in Lincoln's bed. I think he understood Sammy's need to be accepted and his patriotism. He sent Sammy and his new wife, Altaviz, on a mission to Vietnam, not just to entertain the troops, but to report back on why drug-taking was so widespread in the army. Which might seem ironic. I never saw Sammy use drugs, but at home in Los Angeles, he partied hard.
About as close as I'm gonna get to it, baby. Peace.
He was a boozer, he was a drinker.
Yes.
He didn't need the other stuff.
Yeah.
In other words, he would have cocaine when it was the rage, but he didn't need it.
He said, this is not for the book. He said, but the first cocaine I ever had was given to me by Teddy Kennedy.
Oh.
He said, the first time I ever met him, he said, I went up to his hotel suite, and I opened the door, and there were these two black hookers, naked.
Sammy was earning over $100,000 a week in Las Vegas, and yet he still asked for credit on his future earnings.
Get it on in the morning, baby. Get it on in the evening, honey.
He spent big and gave it away too.
His extravagances were of Elton John proportions.
He wanted to live like Sinatra, didn't he?
I love you every night.
Sammy spent money.
Yeah.
He gave Jerry Lewis a Rolls Royce one time, and then Jerry sent it back because it was the wrong color.
His income was huge, but so were his commitments.
Will Mastin took 20% off the top, and the three of them shared the rest. And that went on until Sammy was in his 40s.
That's amazing. I've learned a lot about my friend that I never knew before. But I know this, he'd want to be remembered for his performances. Luckily, we can all still see and hear his genius.
Now life is awful again.
He would have gone through this arrangement so many times with whoever did it. And it would have been just so. He would know exactly what he wanted, where the woodwinds would come in there, and the violin's sustained strings. He recorded this album in 1961, and nearly 20 years later, when we made our show together, his voice still had this rich tone.
Is to smile in spite of it.
He really did have a great voice.
Lush life.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sammy Davis Jr.
In 1973, Sammy made a special for American television at ATV in London. For me, it showcased Sammy, the singer, perfectly. Gary Smith was the show's producer.
Sammy talked about how important it was for him to do Porgy and Bess, one of the great African-American operas of all time.
It ain't necessarily so. It ain't necessarily so.
We knew we would be doing the Sporting Life medley. And I then said, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to let Sammy also do Porgy. So there's that medley where we use a split screen. And it was a big voice, too. He could belt. And it seemed to stay with him.
Yeah.
I don't think he ever had a real problem in reaching those notes. And the ending of the Porgy and Bess medley is one of the great opera kind of performances of anybody.
That voice kept up right to the end, even after Sammy was diagnosed with throat cancer in 1987. The end came in May 1990, at 6 in the morning, at home in the hills above Hollywood. He was 64. Sammy's voice was spectacular. But for me, the greatest entertainer's greatest ability was to be seen when he put his tap shoes on. Back in 1961, Britain's finest tap dancer, apart from me, was Lionel Blair. He joined Sammy on stage on the Royal Command performance, and I was the host.
Look at me. How skinny.
How thin you were.
How young I was.
And how young you were.
But look at the finish of every step.
Incredible beats.
1, 2, 3, 4.
He said, can you do this? I went, yeah. I said, can you do this? He went, yeah. And that's how we did the routine. He was always saying, how did you do that? Teach me that.
Yeah.
Teach me this. He wanted to learn.
Yeah. But he was brilliant, and his beats were so... They were almost like, as we call them, nerve beats. They were...
Oh,
there was so
unbelievable.
many. You couldn't keep count.
He had that American touch of... But he had wonderful finishes. If he did a
yes.
thing, vroom.
Like to see Sidney Poitier do that.
What made him so great?
His whole persona. He wasn't good looking.
No.
He was tiny. But when he started to entertain, he became the most handsome, wonderful,
yes,
striking.
He looked 6 feet tall.
Absolutely. And you were seeing a star.
Sammy was bigger than life. Every kind of star you could be, Sammy was.
Look out.
Still to this day, no one can touch him. That mold was broken.
Nothing that he couldn't do, the consummate performer.
He was a star, and there'll never be another one like him.
There's never been anybody with the versatility. He was always the best thing I've ever seen.
Frank Sinatra, Jack Benny, his peers, all called him the greatest entertainer that ever lived.
This has got to be one of the greatest showbiz stories ever. And what a life. It's been such an honor for me to tell you his story. The greatest entertainer of all time, my friend, Sammy Davis Jr.
I knew a man, Bojangles, and he danced for you in worn-out shoes with silver hair, a ragged shirt.
Nationwide, sponsors of UTV documentaries.
For my personal approach.
Just hold my hand, Winston. Is it another stroke?
That's what I suspect.
What about his family? I'm taking him home.
He's only flesh and a little bone. You're his rock.
The untold chapter of The Greatest Britain. Churchill's Secret, coming soon to UTV.